Good morning or good afternoon if you're Kevork. Welcome back to another live stream of the DDGeopolitics podcast. I am your host, Sarah, joined this very early morning with John and, of course, our guest, Kevork Almassian, a Syrian Armenian political analyst, journalist, and commentator based in Germany and founder of Syriana Analysis, a platform dedicated to Middle Eastern geopolitics and analysis. How are you, Kevork? And I'm sorry that we're meeting under these circumstances, but it is good to see you.
Thank you for having me, and I'm sorry to wake you up so early.
I'm more than happy. I really want our viewers to understand what's going on, and I can't really think of a better person to go through that, especially since we're going to be talking about Aleppo, which is a heavy concentration of Armenians. So I'm very happy to have you on. And John, how are you faring?
Doing great. It's nice to wake up early on Sunday, get the day started early. But this is such an important conversation. So I was incredibly excited when I heard last night that we were going to have this show. And I hope that our listeners can really appreciate and understand some of the fundamental dynamics in Syria, because there's so much misinformation that we get in the United States that leads to all of these crazy types of ideas that people have in their heads, to the extent that you have a lot of pro-Palestinian people here that are anti-Assad and questioning Syria. It's very, very strange. So we'll get into all of that, I'm sure.
John, are you based in the United States?
I am. Yeah, I'm based in the United States. I'm in Colorado.
Cool. I hope to see you soon in the United States.
Ooh.
I will not get a visa, but there is a person contacting me. He's an Armenian American. He says he's an attorney general in the US or something, and he can secure a visa. So let's see. I hope that works.
Ooh, love that.
Well, yeah, you'll have to let me know. And
eat all of the disgusting American food.
We will go to Armenian restaurants with you guys. Don't worry.
Well, let's get right into it. I don't even really know where to start. John, do we start? Because the ceasefire happened, and then kind of all of a sudden,
a lot has happened. I think maybe we start with the kind of the basic developments on the ground over the last 2 days. Of course, we know things have been incredibly dynamic. We heard reports about 2 days ago that broke out that HTS and other armed groups were beginning to make progress. We've heard a lot of misinformation. So maybe we can kind of start there with, like, what is the actual reality on the ground? We heard reports that Assad had fled to Russia. Those cannot be true. So can you maybe kind of give us just some basic dynamics of where things are on the ground right now as we understand them?
I just want to, at the beginning, to mention, when I say this is an analysis, this is my analysis, and then there are information coming from Damascus. So for the people to understand what are we talking about. I think what happened in Aleppo was anticipated. It was expected, and we have been tracing the movement of these militants for quite some time. And they are not the most, let's say, private organizations that they keep their things for themselves. And even individuals like ourselves, we can detect their movement and we can see what they're planning for. And they have big mouths, like many people in the area. We like to brag about our future plans. So they were talking about it, and we knew that they're going to attack. The problem with Western Aleppo was a few weeks before this attack, many of the locations where Iranian advisors and Iranian affiliated forces have evacuated. And this was a part of a larger deal in the region to decrease the Iranian influence in the region. And to be honest with you, Syria has an interest in balancing its relationships between the Arabic countries and Iran doesn't mind that. Iran said, I'm here to secure the some of the borderlines in the country, and they don't have, let's say, imperialistic or colonial aspirations to stay in the country. So when the time comes and the government says that you have to leave, we leave. We don't have a problem with that. So the replacement of these forces were mostly from units that are conscripts, young men who are not, let's say, who haven't engaged in much of war and conflict, and they haven't gained much of an experience, let's say, in the past decade or 14 years. Some of the units that the Syrian army has, they are the elite units. those are the ones, if they were located there, it was impossible. I would assure you it was impossible for al-Nusra to break through the fences, because what happened is basically al-Nusra defeated the army through the psychological operations that they have waged through the media outlets. People were talking about the conquer of Aleppo, and Aleppo fell when the al-Nusra was still like 20 kilometers away from the city center. So many locations, these units started to evacuate out of fear. And remember, you're fighting against a very brutal, ideologically driven fighters who are willing basically to slaughter people for the sake of going to the city. So it's not only, fight between two guns. It's also, if you're captured, you are going to be beheaded in the most gruesome way. So people are afraid, and those are young soldiers. Now, they broke through the city, they occupied all the city, unfortunately, and now they are in charge of the airport and two major routes, the M5 between Aleppo and northern Hama, and also the Khanasser. The Khanasser one was an alternative route the government opened during the days of the siege on Aleppo between 2012 and 2014 for the people to be able to travel through the country. This is also blocked now, and today these militants, they sniped an Armenian doctor and they killed him on this route. Now, why this attack? This attack, which was anticipated by why Turkey unleashed without limits these Nusra Front elements to go to Aleppo. There is mutual ground between Erdogan now and Israel in Syria. Erdogan wants Aleppo, and he wants to create an enclave in northern Aleppo that is loyal to him and send the 3.5 million Syrian refugees in a geographical place where they can have a continuity between Aleppo and Idlib, and also northern Syria, Azaz, Afrin, etc. And they have the borders with Turkey. At the same time, Israel has an interest in destabilizing the north and overstretch the Syrian army, because the Americans have asked Syria to participate in the imposition of what they call ceasefire agreement in Lebanon. Americans see the ceasefire agreement as an opportunity to disarm Hezbollah, weaken it to the extent that they would finish on Hezbollah in terms of its political influence and military presence in the country. So it's multifolded. We want for the local players in Lebanon to run against Hezbollah and to create this hostile environment for Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they demanded Syria to participate in sieging Hezbollah. And they are expecting from Syria basically to stop the flow of weapons and the free movement of the Hezbollah operatives or members between Syria and Lebanon, which they can use also to travel to Iran. So basically, they are asking Syria to kill its ally, Hezbollah. And the first message that was delivered by the Americans to Assad was by the foreign minister of Jordan a few weeks ago, even before the ceasefire agreement. And they told Assad that this is an information now, that the Americans want you to be part of this ceasefire agreement by blocking these supply chains for Hezbollah. And in return, the United States would relieve some of the sanctions against Syria, and they try to bring it back to the Arabic world, this and that. And Assad rejected that. For Assad, it's not like he's just a stubborn person who has suicidal thoughts and he doesn't like to, give concessions. But for Syria, it's also Syria's foreign policy is based on a strategic vision. And Hezbollah is part of a network of alliances in the region, state and non-state actors that have a project of de-Americanization of the region, basically. They don't want for the Americans to have an upper hand. Syria doesn't mind having a relationship with the United States, but at the same time, they are part of a broader alliance which is determined of kicking the American influence out of the region, including Iran, Ansarullah, some of the Iraqi players, and in Lebanon. So Syria has been a victim, basically, of this regime change war for the same exact purpose to dismantle the axis of resistance. So if Syria survived 14 years of war, they're not going to give this on a golden plate now by strangling Hezbollah. So just from an opportunistic point of view, it again doesn't make sense for Syria to strangle Hezbollah. Now, the Turks and the Israelis came to the same, let's say, mutual interest now in Syria, overstretch the Syrian army. Turkey wants the north, and Israel wants to disturb, let's say, distract the Syrian army in hope for exerting enough pressure on Assad to accept this. Now, the evidence for this argument is, if you see the pattern of the movement militants between Aleppo to Hama, if you see the pattern and how they were moving and where they were moving, it was quite clear that they're going to Homs and then to try to encircle Lebanon. They wanted to create a militant, let's say, siege on Lebanon by the Al-Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda, or HTS, call it whatever you want now, but through these militants, which is the Israeli project. And now the Syrian army, because they received a major blow in Aleppo and they had to retreat, redeploy, and go to the north, to the south, they have established that they have to defend Hama at all, regardless of the consequences. So the information from Syria is the red line is now Hama. They cannot advance into the city or the south of the city, because then they will encircle, of course, as I mentioned, Lebanon. So defensive line is now going to be in Hama, and then we will see a counter-offensive. And this is again an information which is based on the talks now of Assad with Putin, who was in Moscow. And this was something that I published and then deleted, and the people were like, you're publishing fake news, this and that. I just didn't want to anger some of my sources in Syria, like telling them, oh shit, I published it, you know. He's still in Moscow, he didn't come back yet, you know. It's like this was the only reason I deleted because I didn't want for anyone to say, like, we told you in information, wait so he comes back, you know. And so the second day I said confirmed, because he returned. Now he's in Damascus and he held talks with the Iraqi prime minister. He talked to the Emiratis, he talked to the Saudis, he talked to the Egyptians. And there is an unprecedented Arabic support to Syria, which is crazy. If you see how all these countries conspired against Syria in 2011, 2012, but because these countries, there are new realities in the region now, and they see this terrorist attack on the Syrian army as a Turkish expansion in the region. So this genius move of Erdogan brought countries who were at odds, like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the rest of the players in the region together against this. And there is going to be consistent financial support now from the Arabic countries. They don't give military support, but good enough financial support to Syria. And there is going to be Iraqi support militarily, Iranian support militarily. Hezbollah, I think, has to stay now, this time, out of the equation. They have to recover from what they have been through at the current moment. They already have some presence in Syria, but I think it's better for them to stay in Lebanon, because the ceasefire could crumble at any moment and hostilities could restart in Lebanon as well. So this is the overall situation. In terms of the fake news, like I was going to hit myself yesterday, because when I read like these people, if they publish they've seen flying elephants, they have tens of thousands of followers giving them thumbs up and believing it, you know. And like Assad has been assassinated, there is a coup. Like it seems that somebody Googled the name of the leader of the National Security Bureau in Syria and they found out who is he. So his name was heavily used. This person, if he wants to run a coup against Assad, he is not in charge of the army. Like he can't move a military unit even if he wants to. So how are you telling me that this guy is leading a coup? At least say the chief of staff of Syria, right? Like to make it look more believable, tell me that the chief of staff is leading a coup. And the problem is, you saw me yesterday, I was on Mario's space.
I still keep it going. I said, I'm not going
it's ridiculous beyond belief. like they're talking about this incident as a fact, and I'm saying, bro, like my parents now are in Damascus. Like everybody is in the street eating ice creams and going and eating stuff. Like there is nothing in Damascus. Yeah. And then like 2 minutes later, they come back. We have a confirmation from Damascus that the coup is underway. It's like, what are they talking about? You know, like the problem is it takes so much patience also from us. And from me, not to tell these people, first, to fuck off, and secondly, it's like I literally making calls to Damascus and not to my parents, to contacts in Damascus, and they're like laughing at me when they hear these reports, right? And you can't tell them who is your source in Damascus, and then they'll say, you have these ties or you have this contact in the
Right.
you know. So you can't tell them, but they're like bluntly and continuously recycling the same thing over and over again, and you're telling them, no, it's not happening, and they're not in Hama. No, they have occupied Hama, but they have not. They have not. So that's why I always say time will tell. Like our friend Jeremy used to say on this
Time
Ukrainian account, time will tell. Time will tell. Yes,
well, I do want to
yes.
give Kevork his props, because if you aren't following Kevork, you should. He's apparently psychic or just has really great sources. Here's Kevork's kudos for predicting the the attack. This is from September 30th. Basically, I mean, it's like the whole story in one picture, honestly. So, also want to touch on, you kept on calling them Al-Nusra Front. I love that you call them that, because that's what they are. This HTS new iteration rebranding of Al-Nusra Front. Let's take a look at who we're dealing with in Aleppo.
داخل حلب الجديدة. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الأبطال المجاهدين الآن. الله أكبر.
He did try to hide it. He tried to hide it when he saw the camera.
This group is Nuruddin Zinki. So they are, first of all, the CIA paid and trained this group. And they only technically stopped supporting them when they beheaded this child in Aleppo in 2016, where they had a Palestinian kid. They put it in the back of the truck and they slaughtered him on a video, and they posted it. Only then the U.S. White House spokesperson, I think back then was John Kirby or something, another. I don't want to call him names now. Anyways, so only then he said, we're going to investigate if there is some violation, this and that. And they stopped the funding. But because the direct funding has stopped, that doesn't mean the US is not supporting them, because they do it through Turkey. And Turkey is a NATO country, and they are still continuously supporting this Nuruddin Zinki. And they're now, as you saw from the badges, they are affiliated with Al-Nusra Fund as well. They're fighting together, and this is not like an isolated incident. Again, yesterday when I was in Mario's space, when I was there were no other Syrians. And once I joined the space, it seems that secretly they started sending to anti-Assad Syrians to join, so that they counter my argument. And this was something like every time I mentioned the crimes of Nusra, they said this is an isolated case. This is the same language that Israel uses in Gaza when they slaughter 500 people under tents, and they say this was an isolated incident. And they're using the same tactics at the current moment. But it is not. From the first days of the so-called Syrian revolution, the revolution itself, it started on a sectarian ground. It started by the calls for extermination against the minorities and sending the Christians to Beirut and this and that. And this is a natural development for the type of the peaceful slogans that they raised at the beginning. So now we have a situation where Nusra, Nuruddin al-Zinki, we have the Islamic Turkestan Army, Uyghurs, Tajikis, Saudis, Chechens, all shades and different nationalities are part of this offensive against Aleppo. But their advances, in my opinion, found a serious resistance in northern Hama. And eyewitnesses who we have in northern Hama, journalists, Syrian journalists reporting from there, and also bypassers and people who escaped Aleppo and now they're going to Damascus because you have to pass through the M5 highway in Hama. They say they tell us because the army told them not to take pictures or videos, so nobody dares to publish now. But they're telling us the nature of the reinforcement arrived in Hama. It's unprecedented, even when there was an offensive against Aleppo in 2016. So even during the offensive against 2016, the type and nature and amount of reinforcement that the Syrian army sent to northern Hama is not comparable to the type of weapons and the nature of the attack that they did against Aleppo. And this leads me to believe that there is going to be a huge counteroffensive. The international conditions has to be first met for it. And it's important for Syria to not, let's say, disturb or, you know, there are certain agreements with the Arabic countries now, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Syria has found itself in a position that it doesn't have any, let's say, foreign currencies. So they need the UAE to recycle some money or other countries to send them some medical aid or logistical aid in terms of the fuel, energy, etc. And Saudi Arabia is also trying to lead talks now with Trump to lift the sanctions against Syria. So they have their considerations. I understand that. However, in this case, Syria also wants to get the okay of the Arabic countries. So Egypt gave full support to Syria. Jordan, which is very strange, they expressed support to Syria. Tunisia expressed direct support to Syria. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Oman. And Iraq. So these Arabic countries declared that they support the Syrian army now offensive against these terrorists, which is good news because Syria needed this regional legitimacy, let's say, to wage this offensive against the Turkish-backed terrorists, something that was missing in 2012 when they started the counteroffensives against the so-called Free Syrian Army. Now, the Iranians today, what was his name? Karakchi, the foreign minister of Iran, is in Damascus now. He's holding talks.
Landed like very recently. I just posted the flight about an hour ago.
So he's probably now in Damascus, or he will be in Damascus, and he will hold talks with Assad and then go to Ankara. So let's hope that Erdogan still has some sanity in his head, and he would accept to retreat these forces again from Aleppo and focus only on Idlib. If not, I think this is going to be the case. He will not accept it because he feels now very strong in Syria and invincible. So I think this is going to be, unfortunately, be treated only through military means.
Well, let's take a look at some of the recent Russian strikes, and then I want to ask a couple more questions about this coalition that's forming, and then the talks that Bashar al-Assad had with President Putin. So let's take a look. All right, so there you see some pretty significant strikes carried out by the Russian Air Force. Now, we know that, as I mentioned before, and as you alluded to before, President Bashar al-Assad had emergency talks with President Putin. I'm very curious to get your thoughts. I mean, we understand that Russia has a very significant interest not only in Syria, but also in the region at large. They've had their own problems with terrorism and instability in the Caucasus. And we understand that, on one hand, there's the assets that they have on the ground in Syria, but there's also this interest to ensure that we don't have this pipeline from Syria through Turkey to the Caucasus of, a potential second front that could open up for Russia. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you believe were some of the outcomes of those emergency talks, and what your assessment is of the Russian armor basically coming to bear so far in Syria, or the Air Force, that is.
So all the sources in Damascus are silent about this, and I think nobody knows except Putin himself and Assad himself. This is something that is very strictly, I would say, private, and they don't share such an information. And it's good because we have to assess how this meeting went by the Russian now Air Force attacks. And this has been accelerated today. There have been busy movements by the Russian Air Force from the Tartus Air Base against the militants inside the city of first Idlib, and then on the peripheries of Aleppo. I think the Russians have an invested interest in Syria to keep the country intact and stabilized. They cannot create any sort of, let's say, balkanization in Syria, where probably the Kurds or probably the Erdoganists could allow such a pipeline, for example, to go to Turkey at a later stage. So this country has to stay united in the hands of one government. Also, even like if you read the so-called pundits on Syria, and they say, yeah, but the Russians have secured their interests in the Mediterranean and they already have a naval base there, so they could abandon Assad and create a Alawite enclave in Tartus, this and that. I mean, I don't even know how to answer this, because if such a scenario happens, this means that the entire Syrian coast will be encircled by the jihadists. And all sorts of attacks, mortar attacks, drone attacks will be on a few kilometers away from the base of Russia. So, of course, this is not going to be plausible or possible, even if the Russians were very opportunistic in this case and they said, it seems that the price for this war is too high and let's just secure our own, let's say, or interest, which is like the Mediterranean, and then we block the access of Qatar to the Qatari gas to the European markets. That's not going to happen. For Russia, they have a clear mission in Syria, and this has been put on the shelf for some time due to disagreements with Turkey. Yesterday, I was reading to one Russian general, which this was Russian, but somebody has translated it on X. I'm not sure if I have it. Just let me check if I have it in my book. I think I saved it. Anyways, so basically what he says is that Russia has been, I'm paraphrasing him, of course. He doesn't say Russia was naive, but it says Russia has been too respectful to the rivals and the enemies and the partners as well. And why he says this? Because Russia respects gentleman agreement, and let alone what is written on paper and is agreed upon. So the Russians, when they have observation points in Idlib, for example, or near Idlib, their observation point is few soldiers with some machine guns. That's it. Like, they don't have a big force no, because they believe that Turkey will respect this agreement. So they don't need to have a strong military presence to enforce the agreement. But now that Erdogan, he sabotaged these agreements, he says it seems that Russia has to impose this agreement with iron and fist, with force. And I think that is the only plausible way now. Like, we always say, unfortunately, because we truly hoped that the issue of Idlib would be solved diplomatically, through Turkey, through process, slowly but surely. Like, we don't want for Idlib to be completely destroyed, or the civilians would be in harm's way. No sane person wants that. But now that the entire region's fate is is at stake, I think the realpolitik and unfortunate historical, if you see unfortunate historical events, at some point there has been decision made that was at the moment looked very bloody, but on a long run it had positive impact. And one of these is Aleppo. Like in Aleppo, every day between 2012 and 2016, civilians used to get killed by sniper attacks and mortar attacks. And everybody said, if you want to liberate Aleppo, you might kill civilians. And then is it worth it? This and that. And many people argued and said, yes, there will be some civilians in harm's way. The unfortunate thing, we cannot really deny that. But after that, there is not going to be more killing. And that's what happened between 2016 and 2024. Have any one of you heard of any person dying in Aleppo by a sniper or mortar and this and that? No, it never happened. I think this is going to be the example that is going to be copied in Idlib, but it's going to be way more bloodier, because this place is like every place that they lost in Syria, they bust them to Idlib. So
right.
You can imagine how many of them there exist in Idlib.
Like an insane asylum. But maybe we'll bring some levity to the conversation. One of the first things that the terrorists did upon arrival was finally, as Fox News has been warning us for a decade, the war on Christmas is finally here. He like gave up and then tried to like tuck in what I wanted to do.
It's so weird, the obsession with a tree, like, and I know this place. They're so obsessed with the optics and this like stupid things, like taking down a tree. What a heroic thing to do. Like they're going to the shops of ordinary people and forcing them to remove the Christmas decorations. And this has been confirmed by multiple people that I know in Aleppo. And there are multiple people, they don't even dare to go out of their apartments because their faces was on social media and they were speaking or supporting or participating in any activities. Even some people who were humanitarian activists and they were participating in the reconstruction of the city, they are scared and they don't leave their apartment at the current moment because their faces was on Syria TV. And these people are very vengeful, and if somebody tells them that this guy was working, let's say a technician for Syria TV, you could get killed, because they believe that you were collaborating with the government and they say you were waging a propaganda against us, this and that. Now, I want to mention something today. I was reading, I don't want to mention names, but I was reading someone says that I just spoke to my relatives in Aleppo. And this is coming from an Armenian person in Greece. He says, till now, HTS has brought no harm to Christians. Many HTS militants stationed in Christian neighborhoods are from Aleppo. 2, the curfew continues. 3, HTS provides Aleppo with more electricity than Assad. Now, when you read this is, of course, he's talking to his friend, but he doesn't understand the context because, first of all, al-Nusra terrorists, they didn't kill many Christian people in Aleppo or harm them directly, let's say physically, because they are still in fighting. They are still busy with the fight against the Syrian army first. Secondly, the vast majority of the people are at their homes. They're not even living, especially the Christians they're scared and they stay at home. What's going to happen for the Christians is if Aleppo stays in the hands of al-Nusra, which these so-called pundits do not understand, it will become another Islamic caliphate, like in Idlib, like in Raqqa. And people have to live in fear all their lives to express their identity or go to prayer, and it will become like any Tora Bora situation, right, in Aleppo. So even if they're not killing them now directly, they will be completely eliminated from the society, and they have to live in always fear and agony. Second thing that these people do not understand, that the Nusra provided more electricity to the city at the current moment, not because they love the people, because the industrial cities in Aleppo is shut down. Like the people have closed their industries and their factories, and they escaped. And because the government has prioritized the production and industries so that the economy turns around again, that's why the people, ordinary people, had less electricity in the city, but more electricity on the suburbs of Aleppo where there were the factories. So all these so-called pundits do not understand what they're talking about, and they are giving this they're whitewashing a terrorist group which has a track record of persecution and killing of the Christians and the minorities. And we have countless of stories which came from Idlib, how they ethnically cleansed the Christians in different towns like Yaqubiya, like in Kesab. I will tell your audience a story. I received an exclusive story, this was in 2019, from a source in Idlib telling me that these Nusra militants, they raped an Armenian woman, and then they stoned her to death. Like, they raped her and then they accused her of adultery and then stoned her to death. I couldn't believe the story because it looked so even beyond my comprehension. Why would they rape her and then they stone her to death? They could have just killed her with a gun, right? But no, they killed her in the most sadistic way. Now, I have name, I have a picture of the woman and everything, so we confirmed the story. So I broke the story, and this was in 2019. And in 2022, I was in Armenia, Yerevan, and I was in a restaurant. All of a sudden, a man in his mid-50s comes and he hugs me and starts crying. And I don't know who is this person. And it turned out that he's the brother of this woman who was raped and killed by these Nusra militants in Idlib, and he now lives in Armenia, in Yerevan. And he told me, Kev, you were the only person who kept the memory of my sister who was murdered in this most heinous way. So we have countless other stories like this. Therefore, you can say and be honest. You support al-Nusra. It's okay. You support al-Nusra. You support their way of life. You support how they operate Idlib. You support the caliphate. Be honest, but don't whitewash. These people, rebranding them to other names, it doesn't change the core. Like, I receive comments, people objecting from these think tanks and telling me, but it's no longer al-Nusra because somewhere in Tora Bora where they have a headquarters, they have cut ties with them. It's like, do they really think we're full? Because at the end, the Al-Qaeda, when we say Al-Qaeda, we're not talking about an organization. We're talking about an ideology. We're talking about a practice, political practice, religious practice, sectarian practice of these people. And there is no difference between al-Nusra and HDS. They didn't develop somehow into a different species and became like moderate now and they're respecting human rights. No, that's not the case. So those who are supporting al-Nusra or whitewashing them, I think they are giving a very big disservice to the people in Aleppo.
Funnily enough, it's the same way they whitewashed Azov, as our mod Jenny just mentioned, just like they did with Azov. But the reason why I brought up that funny video of the Christmas tree is because I really wanted to talk about a population that maybe doesn't get talked about very much, that I know is near and dear to you, and we've been trying to focus on it, at least on Twitter Spaces. But I want to talk about the Armenians of Aleppo. But 1 second. So I wanted you to kind of talk about that community. I included the first part. It might have looked a little violent, but they were commemorating the Armenian genocide, and I thought that was important.
This is the school that I studied, by the way. This is my school.
Is it? Oh my
Yeah.
God! Yeah, I wanted. It looked a little bit iffy, but I wanted to show that
I need to hide. I need to hide my tears now somewhere.
That's so nice. I didn't realize. Oh my gosh! But they were commemorating the Armenian genocide. So I wanted to include that. That's something that Armenians don't often get to commemorate, and they're that's such a large diaspora community, one of the largest in the world. And so that, and they're in Aleppo. And I also wanted to include the fact that I think that was the school that was supporting Assad. Why do the Syrian Armenians of Aleppo support Assad so vehemently? I know you've spoken to your family and friends there. How are they doing? You said they were scared. I know it's a tight-knit and very vibrant community. What's left of it in Aleppo, et cetera, et cetera.
The Armenians in Aleppo, they are the descendants of the survivors of the Armenian genocide. The vast majority of them, they arrived in Aleppo like my grandparents in Aleppo after the genocide, because Armenians had presence in Syria even before the genocide. Many people do not know this, but their presence even goes before the presence of the Arabs in the Levant. And there was the empire of the Crown the Great, even before Christianity, and they arrived to Syria. Now, there were many Armenians in Syria, Aleppo, Deir ez-Zor, Qamishli, Hasake, Damascus, Beirut, and unfortunately speaking, also many of them either migrated before the conflicts or they have been forced to leave. And what happened is Syria in 2011 had around 120,000 Armenians. Most of them were in Aleppo. Now the number decreased 90% before this attack on Aleppo. So if before the attack, this recent attack on Aleppo, there were how many? 12, 13, 14, 15,000 Armenians left. Imagine how many has left now after this second attack. The estimates of Al-Mayadeen is 1 million civilians escaped Aleppo in the past few days after the attack. So of 3.5 million civilians, 1 million people left the city. And this also tells you something. If the Aleppis were receiving the people with the liberators, why would they escape the country? And I know the city, and I know countless number of friends in Aleppo. You cannot believe me how many friends we have. They were desperately posting on Facebook, only friends. If you have one place for me in your car, take me with you out of Aleppo. And there are many of them didn't find someone to take them out. And now the roads are blocked, so they cannot leave. I'm speaking to my friends and beloved ones in Aleppo on a daily basis. I'm just kindly asking them to stay low profile and live their life normal. You know, like it's not like somebody is going to stop you in the street and say, oh, are you a Christian or are you not? Because just life has to go on, you know. Don't show something that could provoke them, irritate them. But today, when I spoke to my friends and beloved ones in Aleppo, there is something strange happening in the city, and that is complete absence of the Nusra militants in the city. It's like they don't exist. We don't know if they are on the front lines. We don't know if they have some tactics. There is something strange happening in the city that there is no presence of the Nusra militants. So people are going to grocery or buy something, but unfortunately there is no bread and there is no fresh vegetables, meat and stuff because there is no supply. So what is going to happen now? Turkey has to send this stuff to Aleppo, and then they will introduce Turkish lira or dollar for them to start using, just like they do in Idlib and just like they do in Afrin, Azaz, and the rest, Jarablos, the places they occupy. So for the Armenians, I think this is, I'm being very blatant, honest with you, you know, like Armenians had a very long historical presence there, and they have been genocided by the Ottomans, and they lost 1.5 million of 2 million during the persecution. Entire Eastern Anatolia today is ethnically cleansed from the Armenians, and some of them fled to Syria. And now it's just 100 years later, the new Ottoman of Erdogan is coming after them again. And this time they are slowly but surely ethnically cleansing them with the collaboration of certain Western governments, not in terms of the support to al-Nusra, but rather, this is something that many people do not know. Many Armenian and Christians left Syria to Beirut, to Lebanon, during 2012 and 2016. And during this time, only during this time, some certain Western governments like Australia and Canada, they opened migration only for the Christians of Aleppo. And I have friends, relatives, family members now in Canada. The moment you arrive in Beirut and you apply for this NGO, which is a Christian NGO in Beirut, belonging to the Canadian, to some other Canadian NGOs, in 3 months, you are already in Canada. In 3 months, and not even with a refugee status. It's a resettlement program. You don't get a refugee status. So you're all of a sudden arriving with a resident permit and you can work and continue your life there. So it was a great opportunity for many people to leave. So I have many, many friends and relatives now in Canada. Sure. They left in between 2014 and 2016 to Canada, and they established new lives. And you think that these people will return after having babies, going to schools, universities. They have established businesses there. So this is how they emptied basically the Christians of Syria through humanitarian work. Something that is very, very, instead of stopping the war, they took the Christians of Syria into Canada and into other places. And yeah, this is very horrible situation.
It's like ethnic cleansing, but through NGOs. Like ethnic cleansing in a nice way, or ethnic cleansing with extra steps. I don't know. It's progressive this AOC version of ethnic cleansing. It's the nice kind, I guess.
Yes, indeed. Very, 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 very sad, actually. I don't think that, I mean, I have a family and friends, and I really don't know what to tell them now. Like, they left Aleppo, they're in Latakia, Damascus. I really don't know what to tell them. Like, is it possible to go back even after liberation? Is it possible for them to restart lives? How many times somebody can restart a life? Like, for someone who hasn't lived the war, this could like just sound like a phrase, but for us, our shops have been destroyed once, and looted, and we reconstructed, and we bought again, and now it's destroyed again. Like, how many times somebody can restart a life? And especially like if your parents have grown up and they can't, like, they don't have the same energy to restart a business, right? So yeah, like, I would be very happy to see Aleppo liberated again, and I would definitely visit it again. And this is not a secret, I was in Aleppo recently, and I think that I can't go any longer in the presence of these militants in the country. If they see my face or my beard, they would. I think they would enjoy me on a barbecue grill. Really,
the beard would be a giveaway, but yeah. I mean, your words are very touching. It's we heard very similar sentiments from our brothers and sisters in Lebanon. We had Marwa Osman on, and we're talking about having to start over again, and the significance of that. And as I'm kind of thinking about this, I wanted to zoom out a little bit, because we've been hearing a ton of propaganda from the West in social media, people who are ostensibly pro-Palestine, saying that, oh, if you're against Israel and their barbarity, then you should also be against Bashar al-Assad, which is just ridiculous. And then in the institutionalized form, we see major news organizations like Al Jazeera, Middle East Eye. They've been covering, of course, in detail the genocide on Gaza, and outlets like Al Jazeera have even been calling it, in many cases, a genocide. But then at the same time, you'll see this consistent demonization of Bashar al-Assad. You'll see a consistent criticism of Russia and siding with Ukraine. So, there's a lot of confusion in the West, in the Western mind, about Assad, even among these liberals who hold a level of sympathy toward Palestine. for the most part, you'll have people believing these demon theories. So could you break this down a little bit for us? Where is this coming from? Why are these major outlets like Al Jazeera pushing these narratives? And could you maybe clarify a little bit Syria's role in the axis of resistance in supporting the Palestinian resistance?
I remember in the past when the left wing was all about anti-imperialism and fighting against the colonialism, and especially in our region. Just like in the West, the left in the region has been infiltrated and destroyed by Qatari money. Qatar has poisoned the left into extent that it's impossible nowadays to have a rational discussion about what's happening in Syria. Because, and this is a copy of what George Soros does in other communities and other forces, basically, NGOs. It's all about now identity politics, and it's about feminism, LGBT, even in Syria, right? And they talk about this democracy that is going to uplift us from our ashes. This is how they believe things work. But when you show them the example of China, for example, you don't really need liberal democracy to be advanced. Technologically, economically, you only need for the people to agree on certain principles and to have a strong government that is managing well the economic, let's say, advancement in the country. Unfortunately speaking, in Syria, the government is like I used to think in the past that they're just you know, they know better. Now I truly think that there are so many incompetent people in Syria that gives Al Jazeera the window to jump inside the Syrian society, and these mistakes are repeated and they are unforgivable, because many locations in Syria fell now due to Al Jazeera's psychological operations against the people and how they spread fear among even the army soldiers, whereas the Syrian army, the Syrian TV, they were showing how the penguins multiply, right? Like, it's like there is no way to compare the strength of the media strength of Al Jazeera with what Syrian state TV does. And we, on alternative media, we have done better job than entire state TV. Like, I can do better from my bathroom than an entire ministry of information in Syria, right? And this is not funny, you know, like, it's like, why?
About a lot of countries. I'm like, just hire us, please.
Yeah, why? Like, we have so many talents, you know. The problem is, even if we have talents, it's like institutionalized corruption that it's like everybody becomes one of them, you know, when they join the institution. So we have so many talents that they lose themselves among the tide is very strong. Anyways, what Al Jazeera does, so basically they convinced many people, and we're talking of tens of millions of people in between Qatar to Mauritania, that the liberation of the people from the authoritarian regimes, how they describe it, is the formula for them to become like the West. Right. If you want to become like the West, you have all this advancement, all these technologies, all these beautiful things that they have. Then you have to get rid of Assad, and then you will become like them. But what's happened in Europe is a process of natural development during the historical cycles that they led them into this type of governance system in Europe or in the United States. In Syria, people can, I don't know how they forget it, but since 1,400 years, since the inception of Islam in the region, not a single country or community established such an electoral, let's say, system or a democratic system based on the elections that the people are calling for nowadays. And I'm not saying necessarily this is a bad thing. I'm saying that for 1,400 years, the people didn't practice this. And then we had 400 years of Ottoman occupation of Syria, which left the people completely, let's say, their natural, social, and human development has been frozen during this time. So we can't really underestimate the impact of history on the Levant in, let's say, West Asia, and why they have certain types of political systems there. Now, if we want to get rid of all authoritarian regimes in the region, I think we should start with Qatar, because Qatar is not a democracy. Qatar doesn't have a constitution, and surely it's not the emir of Qatar who is asking the people who they want to be the ruler of their country. Is just giving to his son again, right? It's the same in every country, especially in the region, but some of them are more blunt than others. So I don't understand why it has to be, this style has to be copied in Syria, but not in Qatar itself. But Qatar is more than that. Qatar is, I think, the biggest PSYOP in the region is Al Jazeera. And when I say the biggest, there are multiple of them, but Al Jazeera is the strongest one. Al Jazeera is basically, if you see the inception of Al Jazeera, the first people who started Al Jazeera, they were the BBC journalists. And this was based on a more British journalism style than any other types of journalism. And what they basically were foreseeing or planning on, the moment Al Jazeera started, they presented for the first time solid, brilliant, professional journalism. The Arab world has not seen a journalistic work like Al Jazeera. They have presented to us amazing news segments, great documentaries, and amazing war coverage. But all this was aimed at gaining the trust of the people, especially through the gate of Palestine. Palestine was the center of this, and once you cover the Palestine case in a positive way, from the perception of the Arabic people, you already have the trust of hundreds of millions of people. Now imagine if you have brilliant journalists in Gaza covering the war and they're getting killed, and Al Jazeera as an institution gaining more credibility because they're targeted and they are coming after Al Jazeera. But what Al Jazeera does basically on a more higher level in the hierarchy is that they see this as a collateral damage for them. They don't care about the journalists getting killed in Al Jazeera. They see them as a collateral damage for the sake of the strategic purpose of Qatar. And that is to hit the players that who give tangible support to the Palestinians. And in this case, we're talking about Syria, Hezbollah, Iran, and Yemenis and the Iraqis. In every place, except for Palestine, every player which gives tangible support to the Palestinians, Al Jazeera is working to destabilize their country, or trying to psyop their people, or trying to regime change and coup d'etats. It's a very dirty game what they do in the region. And now you see all the Al Jazeera journalists accompanying with the Nusra Front. Middle East Eye journalist is making live streamings in front of the Aleppo